Sit down.
A certain man had 2 sons. And one day the younger of these sons said to his father, "Give me my share of your estate now." So his father divided his wealth between his 2 sons. And a few days later, this younger son set off for a distant land. And there he squandered all the money he had on riotous living. Now, not long after this, a great famine swept over the land, and the boy began to starve. He persuaded a farmer to hire him to feed his pigs, but he was so hungry that even the husks he was feeding the swine began to look good to him. And still, nobody gave him anything. Finally, the boy came to his senses. At home, even my father's servants have enough food, and to spare. And here I am starving to death. I will go home and ask my father to hire me as one of his servants. And so, he set off. Now he was still some distance from his home when his father saw him coming. And he was so filled with compassion that he ran towards his son and embraced him and kissed him. The boy said, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and you. I am not worthy to be called your son." But his father called for the servants and said, "Bring me the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Put rings on his hands and shoes on his feet. Kill the fatted calf. We must celebrate with a feast." My son was dead and is alive again.
Welcome to the 9, or is it 12, plot points on the hero's external journey, the next step in our journey into story structure. Remember, up until this point, we've been talking about that storytelling is something brains do naturally. It's found in every human culture. And I'm purporting that it's there because God's woven it into our brains. That the principles of story structure are what make story works, whether you're telling a story in the backyard around a bonfire, or whether you're telling the story on the big screen. We're focusing on 4 primary through lines when it comes to story structure. The meta story, or often called the setting or situation, the hero's external journey, what's often called the plot, and the hero's internal journey, the worldview, character transformation arc. And in order to understand that, you understand the worldview mentoring, or the moral premise. Now, I want you to understand that though these are 4 out of probably 22 through lines that are established in Hollywood, these are the ones that really struck out to me as I was spending my time in Hollywood, learning from some of the top screenwriters, directors, and producers in Hollywood. But don't get the idea that this story structure is something that's actually restrictive. It's the same way of saying that the structure of mammals would be restrictive, that there is at least 14 structures that are true of virtually all mammals. They have heads, they have mouths for eating and breathing, they have secondary breathing through a nose or a blowhole, they have lungs with a diaphragm, they have 4 primary appendages for locomotion, arms, legs, or fins, even though sometimes those are vestigial. They have single-bowed lower jaws, one-time tooth replacements, 4 chambered hearts, ears with middle ears, hair and or fur, mammary glands, Swent glands, and normally warm-blooded metabolisms in bare live young. But just because you have those 14 structures in nearly all mammals doesn't mean all mammals are exactly alike. A giraffe is very little like a gibbon. And a zebra and a killer whale are completely different stories, and yet they follow the same basic structure. And even things as different as bats, which is one of the few mammals the only mammal that can fly, but one of the few mammals that can't maintain warm-bloodedness, and the platypus, which is one of the few mammals that actually lays eggs instead of bearing live young, they're still mammals. The same way is true of structures, that every single structure you're going to find is going to contain these basic primary structures and then the substructures that we'll be looking at. This includes even stories that you're really familiar with, stories like the parable of the prodigal son. That's what we're going to look at next.